I can hardly believe that we're already to a place of preparing for planting seedlings out into the yard. I swear I was just mulching for the fall, but here we are. And it's both exciting and maybe a little nerve-wracking, especially if you're someone who's new to gardening or have had troubles with this part of seedling care, namely the transplanting. In today's episode, we're going to discuss exactly what you can expect after your germination so that you can experience a healthy garden and bountiful harvest. Welcome to the Garden Things with Friends podcast. We're here to show that building a thriving garden is possible for everyone, even those with busy schedules and long to-do lists. I'm Ashley, your host, and 2 years ago, I turned my garden dreams into reality in my suburban backyard. Through trial and error over the next 2 seasons, I have created a thriving garden that I absolutely love. My goal is to inspire you to create your dream garden too. So let's grow together. Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of the Garden Things with Friends podcast. Now here in Northern Alabama, we are starting to dive right into the thick of gardening season, and I can't be more excited. I'm starting to see signs of life in the garden. My chives and sorrel are waking up. The clover that I put into my grassy area is starting to sprout. And the garden is really starting to look at me, wondering when I'm going to start dusting off the mulch and filling it with life. But before I pop those seedlings into the elements, there are a few things that have to happen. And today, we're going to talk through the steps of successfully moving our seedlings from the trays indoors to their permanent home in the garden. So I want to start with a definition of transplanting. And transplanting is basically the process of moving your plants from one place to another. And we typically have 2 reasons why we want to transplant our seedlings. The first reason is going to be that they simply outgrow their starting tray. Now, as our seedlings grow, eventually their roots are going to start to take over the space in their starting trays. This is a good sign, and it says that they're strong and healthy, but it also means that they may need more room to continue growing properly. If we leave them in that starting tray for too long, the roots can start doing this thing where they get root bound, and this will hinder your plant's overall growth. If your temperatures aren't quite right for moving them outdoors, then you can up pot your seedlings to a larger tray to keep them growing. Now, the second reason that we need to transplant our seedlings is because it's time for them to move to their final home in the garden. Now, once your seedlings have grown strong and healthy and the outdoor conditions are stable, they're ready to be planted into the ground or a raised bed or a larger container outdoors where they're going to continue to grow and produce fruits or vegetables. All right. So now let's look at how we go about actually transplanting our seedlings after they've germinated. And I want to talk about the 2 reasons why we may want to transplant our seedlings separately. I also want to note that you don't have to complete both of the transplant methods. In fact, if you get your timing correctly, your seedlings can go straight from their seedling trays to their garden location. Now, last year, I actually started tomatoes and peppers far too early, think like January, and I spent a lot of time babying them in my greenhouse. So my goal this year is to avoid that. And if you use a tool like our seed starting cheat sheet, you can get the timing correctly so that you don't have to worry about managing these larger transplants. All right, now let's talk about potting up our seedlings into larger containers. Now, potting up is what we do when our seedlings have outgrown their smaller germination trays and they're ready to go into larger containers. Now, this is going to give them more room for their roots to grow. In order to pot up your seedlings, you really only need potting mix, a larger container. Now, small nursery pots work really well, and I've gotten them from the Dollar Tree. I'll link to some additional ones that you can use below in our show notes. And then you'll also need some sort of tool to remove the seedling root plug from the tray. I actually like to use a plastic fork. So first you'll want to select your container, and when selecting this new container for your seedlings, you want something that's going to be large enough to hold your seedlings until it's time to put them in their final home in the garden. A 4 to 6 inch nursery pot is usually sufficient. Red Solo cups also work if you cut drainage into them. Then you'll want to prepare your growing medium. At this point, your seedlings are going to need some nutrients to continue to grow and thrive. So a potting mix is acceptable, particularly one that is designed for seed starting. You want your potting mix to be pre-moistened, and I like to use a growth stimulant called Organic Rev. Now, Organic Rev is a growth stimulant that contains natural plant hormones and vitamins to help your seedlings establish quickly. You can mix it into your potting soil or use it to water your seedlings after transplanting. Now, you can fill your new container. You want to leave room for your seedlings and make sure to remove any air pockets. You can do that by simply kind of poking into the soil just to make sure that it's compacted well. At that point, we're going to remove our seedlings from the tray and transplant. And we don't want to disturb those sensitive root structures. So if you use something like a fork on the side of the seed tray, you can remove the root plug without damaging or preventing transplant shock. Now, once your seedling is in the new container, just backfill with soil and gently press down to make sure there's no air pockets, and then water well and place in a warm location with proper lighting. And that's it for potting up. Your seedlings should now have plenty of room to continue growing strong and healthy indoors. So now let's talk about transplanting outside. This method does have some similarities with the previous one, with one very different element, and that is the element of the outdoors. Your seedling's new home has more variability of temperature, the addition of winds, rains, and pests to continue it. So we want to take this into account before simply taking our plant babies outside. The first thing you'll want to do is to make sure that the average outdoor temperature is acceptable for your plants. And this is mainly determining where you are in relation to your frost state. For frost-hardy plants like cole crops and alliums, you may be able to plant them outside before your last frost date with some protection. But for our frost-tender plants, you'll want to wait until the threat of frost has passed before moving them into the garden. So once you've cleared your seedlings for the outside world and checked your temperatures, it's time for the most important step of transplanting outside, and that is the hardening off process. Hardening off is the process of acclimating your seedlings to the outdoors, slowly exposing them to sunlight, wind, and temperature changes over the course of a week or two. This helps prevent transplant shock and allows your seedlings to adjust to their new environment. And what this is going to look like practically is bringing your seedlings outside each day over the course of a week or two, and then each day increasing the amount of time that they actually spend outdoors. Now, while hardening your seedlings off, you can also prepare their final home for planting. You want to clear any debris and weeds from the area. You can add compost and fertilizer and loosen the soil. This is going to create a welcoming environment for your seedlings to grow in. I like to place a slow-release organic fertilizer directly into that transplant hole for long-term fertilizing solution. And one additional thing that I do and swear by after using it with some of my seedlings last year is to soak your root ball in a solution of Organic Rev and water prior to transplanting. Organic Rev really helps to improve the hardiness of your seedlings and allows you to transplant your seedlings successfully. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for Organic Rev, which will also include a coupon for 5% off if you use the code GardenThings at purchase. All right, so after your garden location is prepared, you can gently remove the seedling from its container. If you have seedlings in trays, then you'd follow the same method as before by using a plastic fork to tease the plug out of the seedling tray. If you've potted up your seedlings and they're in individual pots, you can gently squeeze on the container to loosen the seedling and remove it that way. From here, simply place your seedlings in the hole, fill the soil, and gently press down around it to remove any air pockets. Give it a good watering and you are all set. Remember to keep an eye on your transplanted seedlings for the first couple of weeks so that you can make sure they're adjusting well. If you see any signs of stress, You may need to provide some extra support such as shade, water, frost protection, and things like that. Now that we know what to do, when should transplanting take place? Now, we touched on some of the reasons earlier in the episode, but I want to dive a little deeper into them to highlight the delicacy of seedling transplanting, especially when determining when to move seedlings outside. The first indicator of needing to transplant your seedlings is the number of true leaves. Now, these are going to be the leaves that look like the mature leaves, and they're going to grow after the initial seedling leaves develop. Once your seedlings have about 2 sets of true leaves, they're ready for a larger home. Another indicator of when to transplant your seedlings is if your seedlings are becoming root bound in their current container. If you notice roots poking out through the bottom holes or circling around inside the pot, it's time to transplant. Lastly, if you are transplanting outside, it's important to wait until after your last frost date or provide protection for frost-tender plants. This will help ensure the survival and success of your seedlings in their new outdoor environment. All right, guys, that is the quick and dirty discussion on transplanting seedlings. Remember, whether you are transplanting indoors or outdoors, it's important to handle your seedlings with care and provide them with a proper environment for growth. By following these methods and tips, you can ensure the successful transplant of your seedlings and watch them flourish into strong, healthy plants. Now, if you dug this episode, I would be honored if you would rate this podcast and spread the word to your friends who are also passionate about gardening. Your 5-star support fuels the growth of Garden Things with Friends, and together we'll cultivate a network of thriving gardens and plant-loving friends. Happy gardening, and remember, it's never the wrong time to grow where you are.